Hello and welcome to Bungalows for Bachelors. Today we are going to learn about some structural elements here, the vital ones for most of our framing design needs. I got a model here, and in this model, there's going to be some important things to look at. This is a very plain theoretical house that I've got here, and we're just going to talk about some of the members. The point of this is that you need to be familiar with some of the terms I'm going to use. And I created this so that I could show you in 3D what these terms mean and you know where they go. Because I'm going to refer to these when we're drawing on paper, and you kind of need to have these visualized in your head so that we know what we're talking about when we're doing this. In any design, we are going to start from the top. The very top of this guy has a few different members here. This is called a ridge beam. This is not a ridge board. It is not a ceiling beam. It is a ridge beam. Its purpose is we got a vaulted ceiling inside here in this room. Drywall would be attached to the rafters up here. And the purpose of this beam is it's holding half the weight of the roof. So these rafters here over on the left-hand side and the right-hand side have to sit on this beam, and this beam is responsible for holding half of that weight. So we call it a beam because it is a beam, not a board. A board would just be like the ridge board that I'll show you in a second. This beam is load-bearing. It is supported on one end, supported on the other end inside the wall, and it's holding the weight of this spanning across here. So it's allowing us to create an open space. Beams create open spaces. That's what they're for. So that's a ridge beam. Next to that, we got a ridge board. So this is some more regular flat ceiling construction on the other side of this house, and some regular attic space. So on top of that, you'd normally have some ridge boards where it's just another 2x member that's one size larger than the rafters usually, and it's up at the ridge. It's defining the peak of the roof. That's what it's for. That's where it is. This is the guy we got to support when we're putting our braces in to keep the roof up. This is the thing we got to keep in mind. These ridges happen on the solid lines of any roof plan. So we'll just kind of keep that in mind. That's a ridge board. Next most important thing to the ridge boards are the hips and the valley rafters. So those are basically ridge boards, but they're at an angle. So these are the hip raft. They are hips if they're on an external angle of the roof, and they would be valleys if they were on an internal angle. And I don't have an example on this one, but it serves the same purpose and it needs to be supported the same way. That is an example of a ridge board effectively, but it's just at an angle. And it's that way because it's got a whole bunch of rafters coming up to it and sitting on it. So it's doing a lot of weight. It's holding some weight. That is effectively what's going on there. That is the hip. After that would be the general rafters. These create the shape of the roof. These define the roof structure. Their spacing is important. They usually sit on the wall on the bottom end like that. They have a cut end. It's called the rafter tail that sticks out. That's what creates the eave of the house, the soffit, if you will. And there's a fascia board attached on the end of it. And then they come up and create the shape of the roof all the way up to the ridge. Sometimes these are too long to be cut out of one board, and so they will splice these into multiple boards to reach all the way up a roof. And that splice is usually done over a purlin, which I'll talk about in a second. But that basically gives it a support place, so there's no problems with the loads or anything like that. But those are the rafters. They are different spacings because they are supported on different requirements. The rafters on the right side over here are clear spanning all the way from the wall all the way up to this ridge beam up here. And they're doing that because this is an open room. I can't put any supports under here. While I could add another beam across here, but I don't want to look at a beam. The architect said there's only one beam up here, let's say. So that's why it's up there, which means when I selected the size of rafter for this, and I'll talk about that later, I had to pick a size and a spacing that made sense that I could go from here to here and not have too much bending, too much deflection in my rafter. So that's why that spacing is different. This spacing is more typical. Normally your rafters are just going to be 24 inches on center, usually 2x6s. In this case, they are all 2x8s because that was dictated sort of by this side over here, but we'll talk about that when we get into design. But that's why they're farther apart over here. These are 24 inches apart. These are 16 inches apart. Those are the rafters. The rafters that are all the way from the wall to the ridge are called common rafters. Any rafters that are shorter are called jack rafters, from the wall to a hip or a wall to a valley. Those are jack rafters. But that is pretty much what makes the shape of the roof. Now over here on the end, we got these little guys sticking out of here over here. What are those? Well, those are called outlookers because they are looking out the gable end of the roof. This is a gable wall here. This is not a gable wall over here. The difference is that the gable wall has a gable end roof on it. And we need these outlookers to create this overhang structurally. Now, this spacing is not exactly to scale. It might not be designed like this, but because this is kind of a lot of overhang for just a small amount of inset into the roof here. But the basic premise is these guys are nailed and installed here to these end rafters so that we can extend the roof edge out this way and nail our fascia board to these guys. That allows us to get gable ends. And the next thing, like, we can look at the fascia board. So the fascia board stiffens all the ends of the rafter tails, ties them all together, puts them all in a straight line, makes it look nice, gives us something to attach a nice, pretty looking fascia board to. But that's pretty much its purpose. That's what it ties the edge of the roof all together. That is the fascia board. Sometimes it's called a sub fascia. If it is a structural piece of wood, it's not meant to be the final fascia board. It will be called the sub fascia because it is below the fascia board, which is sometimes a James Hardy material or something nicer that looks and lasts longer. Sometimes it's a cedar. So that's the fascia board. Next thing underneath all these rafters is going to be the purlin. Now, there's a lot of words. Purlin is used in a lot of different places for different terms and structures, but in regular houses, this is the member I'm referring to. It's the guy that's going to run across all of these rafters. This is where we want to support them mid-span. So these rafters that were 24 inches apart are doing more work individually than the ones that are closer together because there's less of them. So the rafter that is farther apart is holding more weight. Therefore, I can't go all the way from the wall to the roof, to the ridge, wall to the ridge without any support in the middle. So I add support, and this is how I do it. And this is the sort of the quick way to do it in regular framing. You're going to add this purlin in here, and this purlin is going to be run and in contact with all the rafters it needs to support midspan. You'll notice that it does not connect over to this jack rafter because that span from the wall to the hip is all that rafter needs to do, and it's not too much for the rafter to hold, so it's okay. We don't need to support it right there because that wouldn't be necessary. So that's what that means, and that's what that's for. And these purlins are supported by purlin braces or roof braces. When I refer to a roof brace or a brace, I am referring to these guys. So these are the roof braces. Their job is to brace the roof. In this case, they're all drawn as 2x4s. If they get really long, you ought to not just have 2x4s flat like this. You would basically create a T shape. You'd take one of them like this, turn the other one flat against it, and nail it to it. Just makes it stiffer and stronger. They serve the purpose of bracing the roof up to keep it where it needs to be. So there are purlin braces that hold the purlins. There are ridge braces that hold the ridge. There are hip braces that hold the hip. And if there was a valley, there I'd have a valley brace. So they exist in there to take the weight off the member that is the member it's like supporting. In a case of the ridge, just the ridge, for example, this ridge board is effectively kind of like a ridge beam in that between its two supports of braces, I have a brace here and I have a brace here. Between those two supports, it's holding two rafters, which means it's kind of technically a little tiny mini beam. Now, it's sized, it doesn't need to be a crazy big, large member, so it's, I wouldn't call it a beam because it's not very big, it's just a board, but it's effectively serving as that. So we keep the spacing of these supports in mind whenever we're doing this, and that basically allows us to know where these roof braces have to go. So the basic premise is I know I need to support this peak up here where all this stuff's going on, and then I need to support, let's say 4 feet or so down. So I'll go about there, and I need to support that. And then what I'll do is I'll say, okay, well, when I'm supporting that, where can I reach that will support the weight of this? And that's what there's beams in here for in this case, because it's an open, there's no walls on the inside of this house to hold this up. If there were walls in there, you just set the weight on the walls, you're pretty much good to go. That's what the roof braces are. The ridge braces, the hip braces, the purlin braces. That's what those look like. That's what they are for. They're not always going to be vertical. The basic rule is you don't want the angle with horizontal here to be more than 45 degrees. So it can be vertical. That's perfect ideal is vertical. But if you're at an angle and you're not straight up and down, that's fine. You just don't want to go over a 45-degree angle because that would be putting too much side load on things. That's just from the code. So that's going to help us with design later on, but that's what we're trying to do here. That's what purlin braces and roof braces and hip braces are.